Back when these great series of anime were coming out, these anime, which had quite a bit of potential, the stuff no one cared about, and one I instantly had my scopes on.
Oh, we're gonna make her cry.
I figured that while waiting for them to finish, I'd review an anime that I've been meaning to review for a long while now, thinking it would be a quick review. I was wrong.
You fool!
So here we are, the classic of classics, spanning a full decade, encompassing an entire galaxy, one of the highest rated of anime, and literally seen by many, many people as the greatest anime of all time, Legend of the Galactic Heroes. So before I begin, this is entirely an analysis of the 1980s version, not the modern remake. Haven't watched a single second of that one, nor heard much about it, other than the Alliance has switched to blue for some reason, and the Empire seems to have lost their Imperial attire in favour of actually using some bloody combs. So yeah, got no clue how closely they stuck to it, for better or worse. Ooh, is this video going to be positive or negative about this legend? I guess you'll just have to find out. For now, however, a quick breakdown. So the galaxy is split between three factions: the Galactic Empire, aka the Dictatorship, the Free Planets Alliance, a corrupt democracy, and this guy who owns this one merchant-style planet. A war has raged between the Empire and Alliance for 150 years, but with only two routes between them, it has remained in a constant stalemate for all this time. I'll be coming back to this point. Our first protagonist, High Admiral Reinhard, commands a fleet of spaceships and faces off against the democratic forces who are double in number. Reinhard, however, managed to gain the upper hand, threatening to wipe them out. This is when our second protagonist, Yang Wenli, takes charge, changing the battle from a decisive defeat to a stalemate. Neither side not wanting to continue the grind, they both disengage. Then, after some time devoted to showing off how each society operates, there's a random spin-off episode about a Julius Caesar cosplayer being defeated by the red-haired Siegfried using a clever trick, and then gets Caesared. Back to the plot. The Alliance decides to send Yang and the remnants of the battered fleets, and some novices, to take the Isolon Fortress, a moon-sized space station covered in a thick sea of mercury that can fire a massive fleet-killing beam. This thing is in the Imperial side of the corridor and has prevented the Alliance from attacking the Empire, destroying everything they have thrown at it. Yang was essentially sent because the higher-ups don't like him and expected him to lose. He, however, comes up with a strategy to use a captured Imperial patrol ship, stuff it with these Rose guys, pretend to chase it down with half his forces, to lure out the Isolon fleet while the Roses land inside. They convince the fortress commander to take them to the bridge, whereupon they take him hostage and use him to order a surrender. One guy raises the alarm, so the Roses have to fight their way to the central computer. Meanwhile, the fortress fleet, knowing that they were chasing a decoy, have returned, but upon receiving a message from Yang saying that they have taken the fortress, the Admiral decides to stop outside of its range. Clearly he doesn't want to be blasted away by the giant weapon. So the Roses take control of the main computer and signal Yang's fleet to enter the fortress. Seeing this, the Imperial Fleet Admiral decides to attack with very obvious results. So yeah, the Isolon Fortress has been captured by the Alliance in a strategy which, I'll come back to. So in response to this, the three chiefs of staffs who seemingly commanded the region tried to simultaneously resign, but is prevented by Reinhard as a way to gain favour and stop the execution of this guy, Oberstein. He then becomes one of Reinhard's personal advisors. Also, the current Kaiser knows Reinhard is planning to someday overthrow him, but he speaks of how all empires fall eventually, and his reign will likely be the last. And that's probably a good thing anyway. Immediately following this is a random assassination attempt. Okay.
Meanwhile,
Yang is getting roped into tense politics during a Thai election when a bomb explodes against the anti-war candidate. This lady, Jessica Edwards, who was married to the commander who died at the very beginning, and is a good friend of Yang, takes over, and swiftly becomes the primary opposition. Also, Reinhard's sister is kidnapped by the Kaiser's wife, but is quickly rescued and the wife is executed.
Okay then.
The people in charge of the Alliance debate the merits of a possible invasion. On the one side, the economy is bust and almost all working age people being thrown into the military. Now with the capture of the fortress, they could finally negotiate a favourable peace. On the other, however, they have a duty to overthrow despotic governments
and spread managed democracy throughout the galaxy.
So they draw up a cunning invasion, which has two steps: invade and win. Yep, that's the entire plan. Not to take the capital or any specific target, just rock up with a large force, wait for whatever opportunity, and hope the Empire will fall.
That is the worst plan I've ever heard.
Not gonna lie, to have all these highly skilled commanders go along with this stupidity, instead of lining up one after another to give the guy a good hard slap, is disappointing. But believe it or not, I'm not going to condemn this too much. It's presented as a foolish idea from the outset. It's done more so as an ideological fight than a tactical one, and plans like this have actually happened in real life.
The idea was that they would land, secure a beachhead, begin a guerrilla war, and then the Cuban people would rise up to support them.
Look at their situation. They had Austria-Hungary to the north and Bulgaria to the south, and the possible support of the Russian army certainly wasn't a guarantee of security. Heck, against Bulgaria, that wouldn't matter at all.
Russia's strategy in Ukraine was to shout "Hurrah" and charge, and that went about as well as expected.
So with that, the stage is set between Yang commanding part of this invasion force against Reinhard, who leads its counter. He and Oberstein come up with a strategy to drain the Alliance's supplies by stripping the nearby planets of food, forcing the Liberation Army to waste their resources on these struggling people. A scorched space, if you will. So they strip the nearby planets, the Alliance arrives and are quickly welcomed, giving them their food in return. So the inevitable happens, the Alliance and the planets run out of food, Siegfried is ordered to destroy the supply convoys, and the Alliance forces resort to plundering the liberated planets. This is when Reinhard's admirals attack the separated fleets, defeating each except for Yang, who pulls off a clever strategy to force a withdrawal. In desperation, all remaining Alliance fleets mass at this star for a final stand, with Yang taking complete charge. A fierce battle ensues before Siegfried shows up, causing the Alliance to fully rout towards the Iceland fortress. Yang defends the rear, only able to escape himself by breaking through a thin line in the enemy. With the Alliance forces back at the fortress, the leadership reshuffles, with this guy becoming popular, and Yang taking command of the Iceland fortress. Meanwhile, the Kaiser had died of a heart attack, leaving this 5-year-old as the next ruler. This swiftly causes a rift between the nobles, on one side the Prime Minister and Reinhard, and on the other hundreds of nobles. Things escalate into a full-on civil war, in which the arrogant nobles are defeated by Reinhard in several battles. After several defeats from their fortress, the noble leader launches a nuke against his own rebelling planet, Westerland, population 2 million. Reinhard orders it to be defended, but Oberstein purposely tricks him to allow it to happen, in order to ensure victory and potentially save more lives. Following this, the nobles lose miserably, and Reinhard is shown to be the hero of the Empire. The Katz also decides to go to the Alliance. After an altercation with Siegfried about the millions dead, an assassination attempt happens against Reinhard, where Siegfried gets killed trying to stop the man. In response, Oberstein underhandedly says the Prime Minister was responsible in order for Reinhard to gain power. The man is subsequently arrested and killed. During all of this, the Alliance face multiple military coups, all stirred on by Reinhard and secret agents, hidden amongst exchanged POWs, as well as everyone's bitter resentment over their catastrophic invasion. Yang defeats their fleet, and with an anti-coup protest turn riot, the coups are defeated. The death of the opposition leader, Jessica Edwards, caused the latter to happen. Yang then returns to Iserlohn in time to fend off an imperial attack. To take Iserlohn, the Empire straps giant engines to the noble fortress, and after quite a bit of stuff, they send it against Iserlohn, while launching an assault. Two massive fortresses fire their giant weapons at each other, while the Imperial fleet tries to break inside. With clever fleet maneuvers and the utilisation of gravity, the battle culminates in the Imperial fleet and fortress being destroyed. A small Alliance fleet then chases after the retreating remnants but are defeated themselves. A couple nobles decide to kidnap the young Kaiser and take him to the Alliance. Rubinski, the guy in charge of PHEZZAN, lets Reinhard learn of this, allowing him to justify a large-scale invasion of the Alliance. Reinhard, however, decides to go through the PHEZZAN corridor instead of Iserlohn, something Rubinski didn't predict. Somehow. After the kidnapping and acceptance into the Alliance, Reinhard starts Operation Ragnorok to invade the Alliance through the PHEZZAN corridor. A diversionary force is repulsed against Iserlohn, allowing Reinhard's massive fleet to go through PHEZZAN. More on that soon.
I have a really bad feeling about this.
They instantly take PHEZZAN and quickly invade the Alliance, swiftly destroying their fleet, but Yang arrives in time to force a temporary withdrawal, leaving Iserlohn in order to strike Reinhard in the rear. Now with the Empire fleet within the Alliance sorting out their supply issues, Yang explains the only way to defeat them is to kill Reinhard, all because he lacks an heir or even a second in command, so if he dies, the admirals would be leaderless and divided, forcing them back to the Empire. Yang defeats admiral after admiral, forcing Reinhard into a direct confrontation. He, however, sends each admiral to nearby systems and purposely leaves himself open to lure Yang to attack him directly. His and Yang's fleets are of equal size, by the way. The two men face off in a climactic fight, with Yang narrowly avoiding killing Reinhard as one of his admirals, Müller, comes to the rescue in the nick of time. Yang regains the upper hand, however, and gets another shot at killing Reinhard, but is told to surrender by his own government. They cease fire and leave the battlefield, leaving Reinhard dumbfounded. Turns out Reinhard's other advisor, Hilger, convinces Admiral Mittenberg to go with Ribunthal to capture the Alliance capital to force Yang to surrender. Reluctantly doing so, he orders the best parts of his fleet to go with Admiral Katz. Then after a great ideological debate with Yang, Reinhard installs Mustache in charge of the Alliance territory, planning to annex it later, and returns to the Empire. He then becomes the new Kaiser. And with that brief rundown of half of the show, I'm going to pause there and sum up everything thus far, breaking it down into its separate elements. Starting with... Not gonna lie, there was a ton of characters I missed out from the first half. On the Alliance side, Yang's apprentice Julian, Pilot Poplan, Admiral Attenborough, this old experienced Admiral, the Rose Leader, the elected leader Truinich, the elected leader Trunchbull, and I barely touched on the opposition leader Jessica Edwards, as well as many others. On the Empire side, Hilger, Grunwald, the greater noble and his entourage, the old Kaiser, his wife, the Prime Minister, and I've barely touched on any of Reinhard's admirals, of which I'd say Siegfried, Mittenbier, Rundful and Oberstein are the most important. Oh yeah, and Rubinsky, the leader of PHEZZAN who had been manipulating things behind the scenes. Think Littlefinger, but podgy and bold. Point is, the cast of the Galactic heroes is appropriately huge, with a wide mix of different personalities, which on the whole work very well off each other. Quick example, Oberstein's cold logic and Siegfried's optimism work very well off each of the different admirals' honour and duty. More than this, how they act is very much in accordance to the side of the galaxy they're a part of. The Imperial lads come across as much more honour-bound, much more stoic, more rigid if you get me, while those of the Alliance are more relaxed, laid back, but tend to be more confrontational in their dialogue. You would expect a character like Poplan joking with seniors in the Empire, and you wouldn't expect the stoic Rundful in the Alliance. Whenever Admiral Katz and his second is with the Alliance a lot, he completely sticks out, and not just because of his uniform. Their demeanour is that much different from the rest of them. Even the way they move is much more formal for the Imperial side, while the Alliance tend to slouch and express their emotions more. Without question, however, the best characters are Reinhard and Yang. These two are the heart of the show and make perfect foils off each other. Reinhard is shown to be this incredibly ambitious individual, striving to control the entire galaxy for the sake of peace and justice. He is very focused on his goals, sees himself as superior to all except Yang, always resists fleeing, revels in every one of his victories, and is frustrated by every defeat or stalemate. His kinder side is shown through his relationship with Siegfried, and his reluctance to carry out massacres despite the advancement for his goals and the knowledge of more lives saved. Not to mention, he is a very talented tactician as shown from the outset, and continued in almost all the battles so far. It's easy to see why so many of the Imperial characters see him as the one to lead them all. Meanwhile, Yang is someone who doesn't want to command fleets, nor rise the ranks, instead desiring to retire from the military to learn and teach history. However, he is again and again forced to take command due to his tactical brilliance and his commitment to save lives. But seeing so many lives being taken is something that clearly weighs on him time and time again, despite his outwardly carefree nature. These two are clear foils off each other with many opposite traits, and yet throughout the show they clearly show respect for one another, despite acknowledging the other as the greatest threat in their enemy's forces. These two and the respected rivalry are the core of this show, and it is great. Sticking to the characterization, however,
I've picked out one or two volumes that merit special attention.
The first point of critique is the Imperial Fleet Admiral of the Isolorn Fortress. At first he's shown to be brash and reckless, chasing down the decoy fleet far from the range of the fortress gun. Upon realising the trick, he rushes back, only to stop outside of the fortress's range as he's suddenly fearful of being hit. Only when the Alliance takes refuge in the now captured fortress does he recklessly charge in, hoping to recapture the fortress. Brash, cautious, then brash again.
Oh, come on, make up your mind.
Another moment was when Westerland gets nuked. Oberstein purposely tricks Reinhard to allow it to happen, and the only rebuke he gets is... Reinhard is the kind of person who would have had Oberstein severely punished, if not executed for what he did. Reinhard cares for human life and is deeply honour-bound, so for Oberstein to fool him into allowing 2 million lives to be killed under his own name, permanently staining his glorious rise to power, would be something he would furiously detest. Yet Oberstein is completely let off and continued to serve as his advisor. Oh yeah, and his excuse is pathetic.
For so
long. Ow! Jeez, what was that for? It doesn't matter. It's in the past.
Oberstein may be useful, but Reinhard is a character who would never let this slide. He is never the one to be driven by simple cold logic. But other than these moments, the characters are very solid and work incredibly well in the story. So world building. You got micro and macro. Micro world building is the aesthetics, the character designs, their demeanours, the cities of this world, aka the small details of each scene that go on to show how these societies function, and of course how well this is all brought across. Macro world building refers to the nations, their borders, as well as each of their histories and how well that's brought across. First, micro world building. The background sets, the ship designs, the uniforms, the haircuts, every little detail on screen. This is one of, if not the strongest element of Legend of the Galactic Heroes. The Empire's aesthetic reflects their bombastic imperial nature. The ship interiors are designed to show off the nobles commanding them, with literal stone columns to amplify their figures.
Looks like Exalt prefers form over function. Not what I'd call a winning strategy.
The uniforms designating the grand figures in charge, with more excessive features for the higher-ups. I joked earlier, but the bushy hair fits very well. It gives off this very old-fashioned look while not obscuring their eyes, and this is all completely opposite to the Alliance. Their ships are focused on practicality with no emphasis on aesthetics. The different levels reflect the hierarchy of their democratic ships, with no sense of comfort to be had. Their haircuts tend to be more combed, with only Yang being a bit scruffy, and this one having the only bushy hair. The uniforms are simplistic military ones, with no flashy details. The Alliance cities are all modern, whereas the Empire has a medieval, elegant style. Aside from one bizarre spin-off episode that shows some Roman planet out of nowhere, the micro world building is masterful. Intricate detail and careful thought was given to every aspect of design, even down to the tiny fighters and their interiors. It is some great world building, and I do not say that lightly. The macro side of things, however, is a bit shaky. So this is the map of the galaxy. Thematically it works. The Democratic Free Planets Alliance and the Galactic Empire split the galaxy in two, with only narrow corridors connecting them. In terms of theme, it shows that these two societal structures are at odds, aka only a couple things they have in common. However, in terms of functionality, it is pretty middling. Going further, the Alliance feels as though it's one contiguous nation ruled by a single council, rather than, say, an alliance of 3 planets. Surely each planet should have wildly different cultures and structures, especially after centuries of change. But as it stands, it might as well be the same planet copy-pasted again and again. It makes somewhat sense for the Empire to have similar planets, but not the Democratic Alliance. How the Alliance formed is also questionable. It was founded by a relatively small fleet of exiles escaping the Empire towards unknown space, and eventually discovering planet Heineken. They then founded a democracy and built a half-galaxy spanning nation, with billions of people, which then rivals their oppressors somehow. I mean, they had a starting population of 160,000, and only 100 years to expand. Yeah, they really needed to justify that dilemma, as well as how the Empire failed to notice them in 100 years during the episode-long exposition dump. Oh yeah, let's talk about that. So as Julian is heading off to PHEZZAN, he puts on a floppy disk saying,
12歳の時に戦災孤児育英特別法によって
Sometimes I stagger even myself with my genius.
He then watches an episode-long documentary of how the Empire and Alliance was formed. Now, exposition isn't bad, and neither is narration. There are times when a lot of information needs to be given to the audience, and sometimes you need to have it all explained all at once. The Lord of the Rings opening and the Star Wars text crawl are clear examples of this. It also doesn't need to be at the start either. Jurassic Park and The Matrix have exposition roughly at the end of the first act. Hell, murder mysteries tend to exposit at the end. All of these examples, it makes sense. What bothers me here is how forced and unnatural this entire thing is. This is the founding of the Alliance and Empire. There are giant statues of the founder, Ale Heineken. So you think everyone would know about this, especially someone living with, say, an historian. Maybe if he was looking for something specific, such as how PHEZZAN was formed, or the trade between different planets of the Alliance, that could work. As it stands, it may be necessary information, but is very, very contrived. But you know what? Clunky world building doesn't mean bad world building, and the problems highlighted are mostly missed opportunities. What I'm trying to say is that while Legend of Galactic Heroes has masterful micro world building, it has very basic macro world building. Not bad, but basic. I.e., it does little to nothing with geopolitics outside of vague territories belonging to the nobles. On a more specific point,
I've picked out 1 or 2 volumes that merit special attention.
The random filler episode showing the Empire's master of coin being seized, that has zero consequences and isn't mentioned again. One wonders how bad the political situation is in the Empire if this is considered mundane, but I'm fine with letting that slide. It may not fit with the world's aesthetic and raises a lot of questions, but it hardly changes anything. It's all contained within a single filler episode after all, and it kinda shows off Siegfried's tactical mind. Plus it becomes a neat comparison to Yang's destruction of a similar satellite necklace. So I ain't happy about it, but fine. But what I absolutely will not let off, however, is... this will be my bid for the worst plot hole ever. That is not an exaggeration. I boldly declare that The Legend of the Galactic Heroes has the worst plot hole in all films, TV shows and anime. The PHEZZAN plot hole. AKA the fact that no one used the PHEZZAN corridor in 150 years of war until Reinhard uses it to conquer the entire galaxy. This is a staggeringly gargantuan plot hole. There are only 2 routes between the warring nations, and 6 times had the Alliance destroyed itself against the Isolorn Fortress, aka the top corridor, destroying vast amounts of ships and millions upon millions of lives. The Empire would have also seen immense casualties and destruction, and not once had anyone thought of using the other corridor. But whoever uses it has to taste the wrath of PHEZZAN. I mean, the one planet all about trade and diplomacy that lacks any fleets, fortresses or any kind of defences whatsoever. This would be like in World War II, Germany didn't use the Ardennes as they would upset Luxembourg.
He's got a board with a nail in it!
No wait, it's actually worse than that, as the Ardennes was a thick wooded area. So a better example would have been if Germany and France were brutally fighting with only 2 avenues. The tough, incredible defences of Verdun, when the alternative was an untouched stretch of countryside with 1 farmhouse in the middle. But nobody wants to piss off the farmer. Oh no. But surely there are worse plot holes out there. Why didn't the fleet of starships warp ahead of the resistance? How did Batman get ahead to an enclosed Gotham without resources? Why didn't Holdo torpedo the plan? Why couldn't the Quiet family live next to the waterfall? Why did the New Order destroy the empty base and not the main resistance ship filled with their last threat? Why would the naked aliens who are vulnerable to water invade a planet that has rain? Why couldn't the Supremacy shields not deflect the Holdo maneuver? Why not train astronauts to drill? Why couldn't the First Order not simply bombard the Resistance base from orbit, where there are at least 4 remaining Star Destroyers? Or the thousands of TIE fighters? My god, there's a lot of plot holes in The Last Jedi.
My disappointment in your performance cannot be overstated.
Yeah, all of these plot holes are massive and play havoc with their respective stories. But I still say, strongly say, the PHEZZAN plot hole is worse than any single one of them, for 4 major reasons.
1.
None of these examples spend lengthy discussions about this very concept and shoot down any and all counter-arguments. Was there some agreement made between both sides? Nope. They literally say there was no rule against this. Twice. Wouldn't both economies suffer if PHEZZAN were occupied? Nope. PHEZZAN profits from the Alliance, not vice versa, and is entirely isolated from the Empire. Plus, whoever conquers the planet gains the wealth and loses their debts, something they outright say will happen. Perhaps PHEZZAN is filled with a fiery populace who would fiercely resist any encroachment. Nope, they're a planet of merchants and diplomats. They are very insistent on that one. But the diplomats, maybe they persuaded every leader not to cause the war to spill over to PHEZZAN. This wouldn't work on the face of it, but even this is countered by the fact no one trusts PHEZZAN. Every Empire leader outright says to their faces they're distrustful, and the Alliance see them as profiteering schemers. Okay, but maybe the corridor itself is difficult to navigate. Seems perfectly fine to me, and not one person says anything to the contrary. But their wealth. Maybe they've used it to construct loads of defences, perhaps even greater than Isolorn. Oh god no. Before the invasion they say they have nothing, and during we see about 8 guys with 1 radar.
Good job.
Seriously, their only plan to defend their world is just to ask them to go away. Good grief, a single ship could conquer PHEZZAN. So yeah, the anime is insistent we notice how glaring this plot hole is. Hell, the very beginning episode outlines only 2 routes between the warring nations. One under a neutral faction, and as we later find out, the other possessing a powerful fortress. So you'd be forgiven to expect at least some reason how an incredibly tiny power could exist between 2 immensely powerful nations. Except no, there's none. Everyone just assumed this route could be used.
Well, I assumed it was locked.
Well, it's not.
With how obvious it is from the map how many times they call the PHEZZAN scheming merchants and how many discussions they have on this plot hole, it isn't just obvious, the anime is seemingly desperate to get you to notice it. Unlike the other examples, it could have easily been resolved. Writing an explanation for how Bruce got to Gotham with no resources is gonna be hard. Writing a reason why aliens vulnerable to water would choose Earth is going to be hard. Here, it's easy. If they said it was very difficult and really slow to traverse, or there were some impressive defences under PHEZZAN that the Earth Corp or Rubinsky purposely sabotage, assuming they have a greater plan than, well, more than that part 2, either could have resolved it and it would have been piss easy to implement. But sure, that's all how obvious and preventable this plot hole was, not how specifically it's more damaging to the plot than any one of the others. So 3. This is pivotal to the entire plot. It causes Reinhard to conquer the entire galaxy for Pete's sake. If not for this, he would have been forced to try and attack Isolon with Yang in charge, and would have likely failed. If not for this, the rest of the anime can't follow. More than this, however, it causes everything till now to fall apart. Why in all the galaxy were the Alliance and Empire always fighting in the other corridor? Both sides want to end the war as soon as possible and face a costly stalemate in the Isolon corridor. Imagine if the noble fortress was sent to PHEZZAN. What possible way could the merchants or even Alliance defend against this thing? All actions before this were reliant on this not being the case, and everything after is reliant on it being very much the case, despite how it diminishes the entire history and setup of the world. As well as 4. The entire cast. This plot hole makes every character save Reinhard an absolute moron. Only he, in 150 years, ever thought to use this defenseless corridor, where everyone else thought it impossible. Either they thought the planet of defenseless merchants could somehow block his entry, or they thought the benefit to conquering PHEZZAN and their rival would be worse than continuing to suffer casualties. Oh wait no, Reinhard screws up as well, as for some reason he assumes he needs PHEZZAN's permission. Okay then, everyone's an idiot now. Not even Yang is spared, as only on the verge of the invasion does he bother to warn anyone, and did absolutely nothing to prevent it. Tell a lie, he did send Julian to PHEZZAN in order to figure out their plans and to possibly start a resistance movement. What? How the hell is he supposed to do any of that? He's just one ensign with a credit card.
How are we going to kill a whole wolf pack with just 3 silver bullets?
It's worse than that. We don't even have a gun.
Well, ultimately, this plan literally goes nowhere, and he ends up helping to burn Alliance data before bumping into a merchant guy and go off back to the Alliance. So I'm not even sure why any of this happened. So no resistance movement or even the slightest interference in Reinhard's supply lines, and the PHEZZAN population simply submit anyway. So everyone's fears were utterly unfounded.
This
all is a complete disaster. Hell, not even Ao Zero's ending, where Princess, Plank and Bad Guy survive gunshots to the heart and head, face and all over, doesn't nearly do as much damage as this. It may also be pivotal to the plot, and the hand-wavy magic and science explanation is pathetic as all hell, but at least it tried to justify it, and it doesn't exactly wreck the world building or entire cast. So yeah, obviously the moment an Imperial fleet turns up, the defenseless planet of traders immediately lose, despite what everyone else expected. And Reinhard uses this to conquer the galaxy. It destroys the plot, world building and every last character, so I'm pretty confident in my bid for worst plot hole ever. Tomorrow War's time travel being a close second. Moving on then. While I think I've done a decent job covering the major events, this covers 54 episodes, roughly 18 hours worth of story, so I obviously glossed over some stuff. But suffice to say, barring the thing, the plot is decent. Each event has clear causes and effects. The results of one event causes decisions to be made affecting another. Events don't randomly happen is my point, and I know that sounds obvious, but there are many plots that rely on and then, which is quite remarkable considering the sheer scale of the events, the length of the show, and the enormity of the cast. Speaking of, the decisions made by the characters, barring a couple of instances, align with their character. They don't do things merely because the plot says so, and none get randomly thrown into situations. There are some coincidences, but it makes a sort of sense for these things to happen. As for the pacing, while I wouldn't want to call it slow, don't expect to immediately jump into the action. There's a lot, and I mean a lot of debate and discussion between each battle. but it fits very well for the show. It's one designed to display the grand scale of the war and world, as well as showing the many different perspectives time and time again, with an emphasis on the societal and military structures involved. It's an anime filled with sophisticated debates with all kinds of views, ideas and ideals. This leads neatly to the themes of the show, aka the many pondering questions the anime asks. The cost of war, how political interests make life worse, the necessity to fight despite having an opposition to it, is life worth sacrificing for certain ideals, the concept of honourable warfare. But without question, the largest theme is whether a bad democracy is better or worse than a good dictatorship. This is by far the central theme of the show, exemplified by many of the parallels it brings across throughout the show. On the surface, it could be seen as a critique of both democracy and dictatorships, showing the many faults with both. In democracies, there can be populism, divided command, and leaders more keen on winning elections than doing what's best for the people. Meanwhile, in dictatorships, there is no concept of equality, a thorough reliance on which family you were born under, massive corruption, and a far stricter society, and the justice system at the whim of whoever's in power. However, it goes much deeper than that. Democracy allows the freedom of debate and of choice. It allows people to question their leadership and holds leaders to higher standards. Dictatorships allow good leaders the autonomy to command properly, and with a greater control of the populace, decisions can be made to better the empire as a whole. Of course, the show then brings up counters to these positives as well. The only things I criticise about the plot, aside from the obvious, is the strange episode-long subplots that don't add anything to the overall narrative. The Imperial Treasurer getting seizured, the failed assassination of the Kaiser, the kidnapping of Reinhard's sister, this guy and his love for this random noble's daughter, and of course, the episode-long exposition dump. These are very minor points as they feel distinctly separated from the show. It's just odd that the writers took time to include these random subplots that add nothing to this epic narrative. What does take away from the show is the entire subplot about these fanatic Earth-worshipping cultists. These guys are completely at odds with the central plot and theme. The duel between two incredibly talented admirals, between democracy and dictatorship itself, in the utmost professional and respectable manner. Then you got this discount Palpatine, monologuing their time will soon come, so long as that meddling fool He-Man doesn't show up and wreck his plans.
Let's see you pick on someone your own size, skullface.
For such a mature show, this comes across as bizarrely silly. But this whole plotline becomes moronically irrelevant in part 2, so I'll speak more about that then, as well as Rubinski. Man, I can't wait to rip into him. Again, outside of the greatest plot hole ever, the overall narrative is really well written. With the plot hole, it's like a well-spoken gentleman who's been shot.
War never changes.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
While Legend of the Galactic Heroes does an incredible amount of work with its characters and micro-world building, I would argue its strongest element are the battles. Till now, almost every one has been brilliantly done, with clear tactics, positions, formations, movements and sentimentalities of each fleet. While the first 4 are vital to a clear and concise battle, that last point plays a larger role than most people think. Take the penultimate battle between the Empire and Alliance forces. In desperation and hard resolve to defend their home, the Alliance throw themselves at the enemy, initially ignoring the commander's orders. This reckless aggression takes Mittenmur by surprise, and he struggles to counter their almost maddening attacks. But when the Alliance Admiral finally gets his fleet under control, do the tactics come back, purposely disabling engines of frontal enemy ships to use as cover, as he fully knows not one of Reinhard's forces would dare fire through their allies for victory, unlike the cowardly nobles. I would say the closest comparison I can make for what kind of battles these are is Napoleonic warfare. And I know it's hilarious to think of deploying the old guard into the vacuum, but it's true. This kind of warfare involves assembling masses of infantry into lines and having them fire all at once. Galactic Heroes assembles tens of thousands of ships, form them into lines, and has them fire all at once. No emphasis is placed on individual ships, and instead the focus is on the commanders overseeing them. In this analogy, the fortresses act like cannons with grape shot, as they utterly decimate the lines. And the little fighters are, bees? Okay, fine, it's not a perfect analogy, but it's by far the closest. The first battle is one-for-one inspired from the Napoleonic era, and the series has a couple other throwbacks. But to say this warfare is a simple thing is utterly wrong. For instance, the shape of the ship makes an enormous difference in every battle. Without shields, it only takes a couple cruiser shots to destroy them, and the long, narrow shape of them means that they have a greater surface area from the sides. Not to mention they could only fire from their front and are slow to turn, hence the different strategies to outmaneuver opponents and get to the rear or sides. None of this is spelled out, by the way. The narration never explains any of this, and it's entirely down to the actions of the characters to bring this information to the audience. Sorry to interrupt, post-edit here. I have to mention a literal 2-second moment in the show. Shields were shown to have been in use. It was never brought up before or after in this first half, and god damn it does this piss me off. If shields are a thing in this universe, it changes literally everything. I mean, every single battle necessitates the absence of shields, so I profusely despise this 2-second clip. Thankfully, the scene didn't affect anything, as the range was so far few ships would have been destroyed anyway. It was incredibly brief, and there are scenes that completely contradict this. So, I'm happy to ignore this. Moving on then. Several battles specifically use the setting of space to set up unique situations, releasing explosive gas to orbit a planet in order to destroy its satellite defences, pushing a fleet towards the event horizon of a black hole, the confrontation of the two fortresses of liquid metal using their mass to create metal tides in order to seal any breaches and briefly disable the floating main gun, also catapulting comets around a star to launch them at static satellites. Not sure why they said that would increase their mass, but at such ludicrous speeds it kinda doesn't matter. Point is, they never waste the potential for using various elements in space to enhance these already great battles. The so-called space current caused by destroyed ships is very questionable, but they do follow a factual orbit toward the nearby star, so I guess it cancels out? There are only really two things I don't like with these battles. The first is the idea of using heavily armoured ships as a defensive wall, as that's akin to using fat guys as human shields. And the second is the entire capture of the Isolon fortress. For such an incredibly pivotal battle, it is very flawed. Yang's plan is to pretend to chase down a captured Imperial shuttle, have it land inside with Alliance troops aboard, get them to reach the bridge, take control of the fortress, and use its weapon to destroy the large Isolon fleet before they return and destroy them all.
Isn't driving a stolen vehicle right past the enemy extremely risky?
I need to see Colonel Mackenzie! There's no bloody way you're getting in there, mate.
We're fine. We're all fine here now, thank you. How are you?
We're sending a squad up.
And that's all even without the inconsistent fleet commander acting the weird way he did. It's certainly a difficult task to write a strategy for Yang to capture the fortress in a believable manner, but perhaps they could have sent multiple infiltration units over a longer period in preparation for the assault? Supply convoys, garrison units, specialists or servants of some distant nobles. They have some Empire exiles who know how the Empire operates after all, so they could have done something similar. That being said, one poor battle out of many really shows just how impressive the attention to detail, care and passion for these epic clashes are.
The stars! Like he says, stars!
I want to emphasise there is a lot, and I mean a lot, to praise about this half of the Legend of the Galactic Heroes, and many reasons why people go back to it and why it's highly praised. 1. It is mature. There are no goofy moments, no melodramatic screams, no unrealistic vehicles, no superpowers, no childish characters, no annoying pets with clear voice actors imitating their sound effects. God, I've grown to hate that in anime. Oh yeah, and absolutely no fan service. Nothing wrong at all with any of these elements. Hell, some of my favourite shows have these in them. But it's great to see a show simply depict characters who are practical and professional. 2. The battles. My goodness, the battles. Very few anime have intelligent, coherent battles that emphasise tactics over superpowered individuals wiping out masses of the enemy. Things like Code Geass and even Vinland Saga tend to rely on single individuals winning the day, while stuff like Alnoa Zero and Heavy Object are more like single duels than the clash of armies. To my mind, I could only think of 2 other anime that really focus on the tactical nature of battles and does them well. It truly is an underserved dish, and as I've discussed, this show really delves deep into the tactics of both sides in every battle, giving clear positions, movements, formations and sentimentalities of all fleets involved. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if the original intentions of the show were these battles. These climactic clashes between two geniuses using many tactics to outwit each other. I'm not lying when I say I had these in mind when writing the battles of my book. And yes, it is a fantasy and not sci-fi, but the fundamentals remain absolutely the same. Having truly tactical anime is rare, and rarely is it done well. Without question, this half satisfyingly fills this niche. 3. The dichotomy between the Empire and Alliance. This anime really delves deep into the differences between a good dictatorship and a bad democracy, showing off these unique perspectives and precisely why they fight for the respective sides. You're not necessarily rooting for either Reinhard or Yang to win or lose, you're invested in what will happen when these two confront each other. This half of the show really builds up the confrontation between these two, and it is incredible to finally see them meet face to face. When they do, there are no raised voices or such. They both highly respect each other and simply sit down with a cup of tea and calmly debate. After well over 50 episodes, these two are finally able to speak to one another, and it is incredible to simply watch them talk. 4. The epic scale of the show. It is rare for an anime to be about the confrontation between nations, with many factions involved, all with their own goals and priorities. On top of that, there are so many characters in the show with many different planets, and as stated, thousands of ships in each battle, all with hundreds of people aboard. The grand scale of this show is extraordinary. I mean, every military hull in the Alliance has scores upon scores of people to truly highlight the scale of the conflict, and yet it is completely believable. Both the cast and narration treat this all as mundane, and the way it's all structured makes sense for this to happen. Putting all these together creates an incredibly unique experience against all other anime, filling a niche no other anime can grasp. To make a show that satisfies these aspects is something incredibly difficult to do right. Case in point, Titania. This one was made by the same studio, takes obvious inspiration, but with a higher production, and yet is as good as a drunk clown giving a lecture inspired by the Power Rangers all about the Second Punic War. Honestly, it's like the writers looked at the Legend of Galactic Heroes and turned everything up to 1 billion, without a clue of how any of it works. The distinct practicality of all sides is gone, in favour of way over the top edgier looks. I mean, the main viewer has bloody theatre curtains. Every ship looks vastly different from each other. This is the Imperial landing ship. The Imperial Palace is this. The ship interiors are plastered in distracting holograms and lights, and for some goodness knows reason, there's a giant angry clown face on the flagship. The Empire guy, obviously evil by the way, visits the Emperor and, no joke, has his subordinate pull out a gun and kill the Prime Minister in the throne room. In any sensible world, they would have more holes than a cheese grater. Oh, it's okay because he said the man was a rebel, without presenting any evidence. Kinda reminds me of someone. Meanwhile, his entourage is a typically generic group with colours inspired by the Power Rangers. The Yang guy is horribly unprofessional and nonchalant about the death of many ships, filled with soldiers he himself ordered to advance. Actually, it's worse than that, as he's kinda jovial throughout the entire battle. And before that even begins, I've got no clue as to what the formations of the fleets are. In fact, they purposely spin the map around to make it even more confusing. When they do finally show the proper formations, they specifically have the Alliance, I'm just going to call them the Alliance, form a bull shape to defend against being encircled.
You have the worst possible hand, you lose.
What?
Clearly, they have no clue that these battles evolve the way they do is because of the shape of the ships. When you sketch out this kind of fleet in a ball shape, you easily realise just how abysmal this strategy is, especially when each ship can only shoot forward. When a fleet moves like this towards you, you either back up while shooting or charge straight through as they begin to spread themselves thin. And also, hey look, shields! Doesn't that change nearly every battle? And the battle ends by the Alliance suddenly pulling out a fleet of massive space guns out of literally nowhere.
I think you should lead with that next time.
So yeah, even if an anime was inspired by the Legend of the Galactic Heroes, it takes considerable effort and care to make anything approaching the quality in this first half. Emphasis of in this first half, as there are a number of problems. The capture of Isolorn, Oberstein get away with Westerland, Rubinsky and the terrorists, more of that in part 2, and of course, the worst plot hole of all time. That last point being incredibly damaging to the show, and throws a massive spanner into the overall judgment of this first half. But after thinking about it for a while, I would say this half is overall positive. It absolutely won't be for everyone. A gradually paced show filled with lengthy philosophical debates, and whose battles involve dots firing lines at dots. Oh yeah, and the animation is akin to the Star Trek animated series, but with about half the animation. But that's the point of a niche, and had it ended here, The Legend of the Galactic Heroes would have been easily among the best of the classics. Perhaps the best. Certainly nowhere near the best of anime, but this first half has a special place in this medium. And with that final blunt hint, end of part 1. Next time, everything, and I mean everything, falls apart.